Hi everyone, my name is Simon and I am going to do a video on COVID-19. So what prompted me to do this was basically I was on Facebook as I usually am, and I saw this video that someone shared. It's from VOX, and the name of the video is "Coronavirus is not the flu, it's worse." Okay, so I did notice quite a lot of misinformation in there, and some what I felt was dishonesty as well. So I'm going to try and point out some of what I've seen.
Measles is one of the most contagious diseases we know. Just one person is likely to infect between 12 and 18 people. That number is called a disease's basic reproduction number, or R0. Scientists use it to describe how contagious a disease is. Zika, it has an R0 of up to 6.6, super contagious. But the seasonal flu, just a little over 1. And COVID-19, the disease caused by the coronavirus, just about 2. That difference between the flu and COVID-19 doesn't seem so big, especially when you look at them next to these really contagious diseases. Plus, a lot of the symptoms of the flu and COVID-19 are really similar. A fever, cough, they can even both lead to pneumonia, which is ultimately how they can both be fatal. So thinking of COVID-19 and the flu as similar is a common and frankly understandable comparison to want to make.
This is like the flu.
It's a lot like the flu.
I like to believe that it's going to end up more like the flu virus.
But wait, let's go back to those R0 numbers again. If the flu has an R0 of 1.3, that means each person gets either 1 or 2 people sick. After 10 rounds, that's 56 total people. And if we run the model with COVID-19's R0 at 2, if one person with it gets 2 people sick, you get 2 people sick. After 10 rounds, that's more than 2,000 people. This does not happen with the flu, because COVID-19 is very different.
Okay, so the first thing I want to point out about this section, okay, in this section they talk about the R0 value, which is basically how contagious the disease is, okay, how quickly it spreads. Now they've highlighted the difference between flu and COVID-19, and basically the idea is that even with a very small difference in R0 values, the end effects are quite large. Okay. Now the thing is, what I want to say though is that this whole section of the video is a bit of fear mongering. The R0 value doesn't really tell you how deadly the virus is. Okay, it just tells you how quickly it spreads. Now, the reason that's important is if it's a harmless virus, which many of us think it is, then it doesn't matter how quickly it spreads. Okay, whereas if it's a deadly disease, then of course then you worry about how quickly it spreads. But I mean, over the last maybe 3-4 months, 3.5 months, there's been a lot of evidence that this virus is not very deadly, and so highlighting this sort of R0 value, I think it's a bit of fear mongering. Okay. Now another thing I want to point out, let's go and look at the Wikipedia article over here. Okay, this is the basic reproduction number, okay, which is the R0 value, and you can see a list of diseases here, right? Now the thing is, the common cold is about here, and the common cold actually has a higher contagiousness or R0 value than COVID-19. Okay, and yet, no one really cares that much about the common cold. Okay, so people get it, they feel sick for maybe 1 or 2 days, and then it goes away. Okay, so just because a disease has a high R0 value doesn't really mean that it doesn't mean that it's something to be concerned about necessarily. Okay, now they've run the numbers for flu and COVID-19. Now, what happens if you run these same numbers for measles? Okay, now as you recall earlier in the video, they say that measles has an R0 value of 12 to 18. Now, if we run those same numbers, this is what you get. Okay, so if you start off with an R0 value of 12, then you're going to end up with 67 billion. Okay, I mean, there aren't even that many people on the planet, right? And if you go to the high range of measles, that's 3.7 trillion. Okay, again, not even close to how many people there are on the planet. So that number for measles is somewhere between 12 to 18, between 67 billion to 3.7 trillion. Okay, now Obviously, that doesn't mean that the measles is like a billion times as deadly as COVID-19. It's not, right? And so so I feel that this part of the video is just fear mongering.
Like the flu?
It's a lot like the flu.
I like to believe that it's going to end up more like the flu virus.
Okay, so it's interesting what this lady says that it's gonna just become like a flu virus, and I think that's what's gonna happen too, based on the evidence that I've seen. So basically, flu season usually consists of maybe 3 or 4 different strains of viruses going around the world, infecting people, causing like a epidemic during a certain time of the year, and so on. And so instead of there being like 3 or 4 strains of flu viruses this year, next year there's going to be 5, because just COVID-19 is going to be one of those flu viruses that are just going to be going around in cycles. In most cases, uh, people get it, feel sick for 2 or 3 days or whatever, and then they just get better and carry on with their lives. Like I said, there are something like 3, 4, 5 flu viruses going around worldwide, and but nobody panics about those, right? And the only people who really care about that are the people who get the flu vaccines. And to me, the flu vaccine is completely unnecessary. I've not really had one. I just feel sick for a couple of days and then get it over with. Okay, my immune system is able to handle it naturally.
When we start to like look for that comparison to the flu, we almost like calm ourselves down. But unfortunately, that's not quite the right reaction here.
The impression I get when I'm listening to this guy is that he's just trying to emotionally manipulate me. So a lot of what he's saying is basically meant to evoke some kind of an emotional response, I think.
Every year, the seasonal flu kills as many as 60,000 Americans. As of late March, COVID-19 has killed about 34,000 across the whole world.
Okay, so this is just plain dishonest. Look at the title: Flu deaths in the US and versus COVID-19 deaths worldwide. Now, these two numbers are not even comparable. Like, you can't put them on the same graph. Okay, so um, flu deaths roughly something like looks like around 40,000 on average per year, and COVID-19, you can't compare that with worldwide numbers for COVID-19. The actual rate for the US right now, after maybe 3.5 months, is about 10,000, I think it was. Now, the additional problem we've got here is that a lot of flu deaths, a lot of regular flu deaths, are being put into this column here. So they're being attributed to COVID-19, and that's been admitted by people higher, and so that's the problem. They're just inflating these numbers. Okay, so the actual numbers for the U.S. aren't that bad. Yeah, so most people dying of COVID-19, it's been found that they were dying of other diseases anyway, like they had underlying conditions, weakened immune systems, and so on. So if they didn't die of COVID-19, they would have died from something else. So there have been some WHO guidelines sent to doctors and hospitals, and it basically says that even if there's some doubt as to what exactly killed the person, they're meant to put in COVID-19 anyway. And I think that's highly problematic. It's going to be very difficult to analyze these numbers because there's a lot of uncertainty in how the recording of deaths is being done.
Tens of thousands of people a year die of the flu, but we haven't had this for a year yet. Only had this for a few months. Like, the trouble is coming, and we can predict it, and we can see what's coming, at least to a certain extent.
More emotional manipulation right there.
The first really big difference between COVID-19 and the flu is how long it takes you to feel sick. From the moment you're infected with COVID-19, it usually takes 5 days before you start to feel symptoms. But it can take as long as 12 or even 14 days. This is the incubation period, the time between when you catch it and when you first realize you're sick. And scientists think you could be contagious during most of this period. The flu, by comparison, has an average incubation period of just 2 days. You get sick, and pretty soon you feel sick, and you know you're contagious. This is what we're used to. But COVID-19 flips that around. You can be contagious and spreading it around for several days and up to 2 weeks before it even occurs to you that you're sick. And that leads to the next big difference.
Okay, here again, just like the discussion about the R0 value, I don't think it's very useful, and it's just more fear mongering. Basically, what we're interested in how many people are getting infected, how many people are recovering, and how many people are dying. That's all that really matters. If it's a harmless disease, as a lot of people think, then how quickly it spreads doesn't really matter that much.
No human immune system had seen this virus before. Nobody has a natural immunity to it.
Okay, so I've got a problem with what he's saying right there. Now, he's saying that no human immune system has seen this virus before, which is true. And his second statement raises a few red flags. He's saying that no one has any natural immunity to it. Now, it really depends on what you mean by natural immunity, because in my view, if you've got an immune system, and if you get infected by a virus and your immune system takes care of it, then you have immunity to it. Okay, so you've got an immune system which is designed to protect you against these viruses that are new. Okay, so I mean, from his point of view, he thinks that you only have immunity to it if you only get the flu vaccine. But in my view, if you've got an immune system that works, then you've got immunity to the virus. So the immune system has basically evolved to protect us against not only viruses that it knows about, but also novel new viruses as well. Okay, and for example, when a baby is born, that baby has pretty much no antibodies or immunity to anything out there, and the baby usually gets immunity usually from breast milk, and also um, from the environment generally. So when the baby is exposed to the home environment, it picks up germs by the air, by touching things and so on, and the baby's own immune system can easily handle those. And then it creates these antibodies which then help fight future infections.
In flu season, there's always a number of people in the population who are already immune to the flu. That can be because they got their flu shot, or maybe they've already had that flu strain.
Okay, so a lot of people get the flu shot because they're encouraged to do so. The flu shot is designed to minimize the severity of infections. So, for example, if you get the flu, then it won't last as long, and you also won't feel as sick as if you didn't have the flu shot. Okay. Now, other people who prefer to lead a more natural lifestyle, they might decide to not get the flu shot, and they'll probably get infected by the flu anyway. And then after a couple of days, their immune system will kick in, kick the virus out, and then they'll gain immunity to that strain of flu. So there's not really a great deal of difference. Some people just like to live a more natural lifestyle. Like, I mean, there are vegetarians, there are, people who eat raw food, vegan, and so on. So, and they should have the freedom to do so. So, flu is already widespread in the population anyway, and really the flu shot, it doesn't really do that much. It's just a band-aid on the problem, because as I said, all it does is just reduces the severity of a problem, and it also reduces the number of sick days, number of contagious days. But other than that, it doesn't wipe the virus out. Okay, so the flu virus is widespread. It just keeps circulating amongst the population. So I mean, in the absence of the flu shot, uh, life would just go on because people still have natural immunity to it.
And that limits the spread of the virus. When one person is contagious with the flu, they can only spread it to people who aren't immune, who can only spread it to other people who aren't immune. That's why scientists and doctors urge us to get our flu shot every year. If enough people have immunity, they can kind of shield the virus from reaching others.
So a really strange way of looking at things. So they're saying that when this original person with the flu infects others and the virus spreads, then there are some people already in the population who have immunity, and these people shield other people from getting the virus. Now the thing is, why should this? I mean, what's so great about this shielding effect anyway? For example, this person here gave the virus to this person, and this person gave it to this person. But when each of these people got infected, did the world end, or did some extremely bad thing happen? No, not really. They just got a bit sick, felt sick for a couple of days, and then they probably recover after a couple of days. Okay, so while it's nice that these people are here shielding these people from viruses, it's not really necessary, because if this person gets infected, the world's not going to end. As simple as that. If people are vulnerable to the virus, they can always self-isolate. It's just like, for example, lots of people are gluten-free, or they're allergic to nuts and so on. But you don't go banning nuts, or you force everyone to eat gluten-free bread, right? So people who have the problem already know enough to be able to deal with it by themselves. So in the same way, if you've got a weakened immune system, um, or if you're old and you've got underlying health problems, you should know by yourself. You can take responsibility for yourself. You can self-isolate, and so on.
Immunize people, the more they can protect those that are susceptible to the virus. But COVID-19 is brand new. None of us have had it before, and there's no vaccine, which means nearly everyone on the planet is susceptible. So when a contagious person, who may not even know they're infected, comes into contact with others, it can spread like wildfire.
Yeah, so it's going to spread, but so what? It's going to spread. People are going to get infected. They might feel sick for a couple of days, and then it's all going to be over because the immune system is going to take care of it. There's literally like a 99% recovery rate for this virus.
And then you see how much more dangerous COVID-19 can be. Only 2% of people with the flu need to be hospitalized, but 20 to even 30% of people who test positive for COVID-19 do. And we're
Okay, so here's another piece of misinformation. They're being dishonest right here, and it's really hard to spot. Okay, um, now what they're saying is that people who have the flu, 2% of them need hospitalization. Okay, whereas in the case of COVID-19, 20 to 31% of people who test positive for COVID-19 need hospitalization. Now, the reason why these two numbers are not comparable is, let's run an example, okay? So let's say if in this fictional country you have 1,000 people in there, and 100 of them get infected by regular flu, okay? Then out of those 100 people who are infected by flu, 2 of them are going to require hospitalization, right? Now, in the case of COVID-19, what they're saying is, in a fictional country of 1,000 people, let's say 100 of them get infected by COVID-19, okay? So out of those 100 people, 5 of them get tested, okay? Now, out of those 5 who get tested, 20 to 31% of those 5 people require hospitalization. So that ends up being something like just 2 people anyway, okay? So there's 2 people here, there's 2 people here, except the percentages are different, okay? So they're comparing 2 entirely different numbers here. And yeah, so that's another piece of dishonesty in this video.
We're still learning about COVID-19's fatality rate, but scientists think it's somewhere between 1 and 3%. But the flu's rate is even lower, 0.1%.
Okay, so a lot of these numbers are not reliable, unfortunately, because of the way COVID-19 is being put on death certificates. The problem is that the WHO has been giving guidelines to hospitals and doctors saying that essentially if you have any doubts about what this person died of, you just put COVID-19 in there. Okay, so even if the person had underlying conditions that they were dying from anyway, and if they just happened to test positive for COVID-19, or even if they didn't test positive for COVID-19, but if you have a suspicion that that person had COVID-19, then you just put down COVID-19 as a primary cause of death. Okay, and so because of that, there's lots of variations in how different countries are reporting these numbers. You cannot even you can't compare flu and COVID-19 because flu pretty much has been going on for decades, and so there's quite a lot of numbers and statistics available, which are more or less reliable. Unfortunately for COVID-19, it's really impossible to say. Okay, so you just cannot compare these numbers here. So if you exclude those people who had underlying conditions that they were dying from anyway, then the numbers are pretty much the same for COVID-19 and flu.
And that's a disease that can kill 60,000 people a year in the US alone. And he's just talking about the average across all age groups. For older people or people with compromised immune systems, it can be way higher. And that's especially scary when you remember all the other things.
The interesting thing about this graph, I just want to point out, now this graph is right. I mean, the virus does disproportionately affect those who are much older. And yeah, generally young people are safe from this virus. Okay, they haven't said anywhere in this video that people who are dying by COVID-19, they tend to have lots of underlying conditions and they have weakened immune systems and stuff like that. So they don't really say that in this video. Now, the thing to notice here is that on the far right are generally people who are retired, who are not in the working age population. Okay, so it's relatively easy to isolate and sequester these people from the other population who might be infected. So these people here, it's a lot more difficult to get these people to isolate because they're working age. As soon as you put these people under lockdown, you're going to shut down the whole economy. Okay, when you shut down the whole economy, these people are going to suffer, and these people are also going to suffer because these people here depend on these people. Okay, so if you sequester and quarantine these people, that's fine because the economy and life can just go on. All these people need to do is just quarantine for about maybe 2 months, and then everything's back to normal again. You know. Now, what the doctors have recommended, unfortunately, is that the whole economy should be shut down because these people need to be quarantined so that they don't give the disease to these people. But that's a completely backwards kind of approach, you know, because yeah, these older people depend on these young people. You're going to see fatality rates increasing from unrelated factors now. It's sort of like a trolley problem where you can either kill these people or you can kill these people. The trouble is that if you kill these people, you're also going to kill these people as well. COVID-19 seems to be, just like the regular flu, it seems to be like an opportunistic sort of disease. Okay, which means that if someone's already weak, then it's going to have a disproportionate effect on them.
Estimates vary, but some scientists have warned that between 20 and 60% of the world's population could become infected with them.
Okay, so again, just like all the other, the R0 value and how long the contagious period is and so on, again, this number really doesn't matter. If COVID-19 is a harmless disease like the common cold, then it doesn't matter if this number is 100%, so what? For example, the common cold, what are these numbers for the common cold? Would it be more than 60%? Of course it could be more than 60%. But, you don't see people worrying about that.
Because COVID-19 has no cure and no vaccine. The only defense we have against it is social. We can take ourselves out of the chain, not with immunity, but with social distancing.
So that is really stupid. That's unbelievably stupid. Because there's no need for social distancing at all. Because we already know that it's a fairly harmless virus. Okay? And so what happens is your immune system can deal with the virus fairly easily. And once you get the virus, your immune system beats it, and then you have immunity. You don't need social distancing. You don't need a vaccine. So why they're saying this? It just doesn't make any sense. Okay. This is not the only defense against the virus. This is also very impractical in reality because human beings are social creatures. I mean, there's an economy there. People have jobs. People need to earn money to live. A lot of our economy it's a service economy, which means that back in the old days, if you told everyone to be social distancing, that's fine because many families might have had a backyard garden where they can probably grow their own stuff. But unfortunately, now most of the population lives in cities where they depend on they depend on jobs to be able to buy things and so on. So throughout history, there have been countless diseases, and human beings have always been able to rise above that. It doesn't matter what disease it is, whether it's Black Plague or the Spanish flu or whatever. The human immune system can handle a lot of those things. So there's really no need for a vaccine. It's going to benefit a lot of pharma companies and doctors, and it's going to be a huge economic boon to the medical industry. But to the rest of us, that's just an unnecessary expense. He said, you don't really need a vaccine for this virus. Um, if you do want immunity to the virus, what you can easily do is just get someone to cough on you. Okay, someone who has COVID-19, you just tell them to cough on you, and you get the virus, and then you'll feel sick for a couple of days, and then you'll get immunity to it. Okay, so that's pretty much what you can do. That's it's not necessary for a vaccine. I was reading about Spanish flu a while ago, and I just wanted to point out some interesting paragraph here. This is a Wikipedia page, and not many people know, but the Spanish flu came in two waves. The first one was not as deadly as the second one, and you can see here that the fact that those who recovered from first wave infections had become immune show that it must have been the same strain of flu. Okay, so the virus mutated into a more deadly strain in the second wave. So this was most dramatically illustrated in Copenhagen, which escaped with a combined mortality rate of just 0.29%, okay, because of exposure to the less lethal first wave. Okay, so back to the video. Now, there is a chance that COVID-19 might mutate into something worse. If that happens, you're better off getting COVID-19 now and getting immunity to it. Because when the second wave of more deadly flu comes in, that's it. You're going to have a big problem there. So another thing I wanted to point out was I came across this article. So the title of the article is Epidemiologist Warns of Unintended Consequences from Lockdowns. So this is a reputable person, I assume, Rockefeller University in New York City. So the general argument made by Dr. Witowski is that lockdown orders prolong any efforts in developing so-called herd immunity, which is our only weapon in exterminating the novel coronavirus outside of a vaccine. Okay, a vaccine could take about 18 months. Now, focusing on shielding the most vulnerable to the virus, which means quarantining or sequestering the most vulnerable, while allowing the young and healthy to build up immunity by letting them go about their daily lives, would, in the end, save more lives.
Just physically not being around anyone and staying home as much as possible.
So, how long could this last? Because if you don't have the
But that
virus, then, and you're at home, and the moment the lockdown is lifted, you go outside and you're going to get infected anyway. Okay, so it doesn't really matter. And again, you're going to be stepping outside a house when you have no immunity to the virus, and if a more deadly strain comes along, then you're screwed. Okay, so it's in your best interest to go out there, get infected, get immune to it, and you should only really be self-isolating if you are in a vulnerable, high-risk age group.
only works if each of us takes it seriously, which is why comparing it to the flu, while understandable, is not helpful.
It's natural to want to find a comparison, to want to make this seem small. When we use the flu as the backdrop, it almost numbs us, or it can numb us and make us maybe even feel better about the current situation, because the current situation is bad. So now is not the time to be numb. We need to be vigilant and then use our vigilance for useful actions.
Lots of emotional sounding arguments, nothing useful in there. It's a lot of emotional manipulation, lots of appeals to authority, what scientists say, what this and that. What's required here is wisdom, not necessarily a medical degree. Okay, because lots of doctors are now even starting to realize that the current strategy for dealing with the virus is not the best one. The whole video is very one-sided. It just gives you the medical side of things. The people who are experts on the medical side of this disease, they're not experts on the economy or sociology or anything of the other stuff that's important. The fear is that the cure is going to be worse than the disease. Now, there's a really good video done by Dennis Prager. It's called The Overlooked Victims of Quarantine, and I highly recommend you watch this video. It is so good. And what he basically explains is that we're looking at this problem in a very, very medical focused way, but in actual fact we need to be looking at a more holistic, all-around kind of view. Anyway, thank you guys for watching my video. I welcome any suggestions, comments, questions. Subscribe to me on either YouTube and on Facebook. I come across a lot of useful information on Facebook, so I'll be really happy to share that with you. Yeah, have a good day then. Bye.